You planned this.
It's a comedy routine and I haven't started. I feel so formal. Hi. Welcome, Bob. For those who are new, just to review, Bob is International Butts on Benches. Last year I made an executive decision, formed a sub-chapter called Hi Bob, Hackers International Butts on Benches. Only a few could be members. Those who had that pride in themselves as true hackers. Those who could stand to sit at the piano and play. Some days awfully horrible stuff. Yet retain that sense of pride and dignity when the stench was overwhelming. It's wonderful to see you all here, and it always strikes me, what a lonely profession we are. Everybody all over the place. And it's so nice. I was thinking about all the things the Guild is starting to do, and that's, wonderful. But I was thinking this is what really is so nice, just to get together. If I had to make priorities of, what we were doing, this would still remain the biggest one, just to get together, just to talk at dinner, just to share the kind of stuff and the silliness. Really helps me a lot, and I think from what I hear from all of you, that's really important too. And the other thing that's really important to me is that there's a whole range of people in the field, from the youngest people who just started, hopefully, although there's not much of that now, to people who have played all their lives. And that's, I want to see people here who have played 20 years longer than I've played. My word. I have one goal with Marjorie, and that is this year to find her age. I'm going to try that out of her this year to find exactly how old, and she doesn't let me know. So we have Jess Meeker here this year too, of course. I think clearly is the most senior among us, and it's wonderful to have that kind of experience, and several other guests, which I won't mention right now. There's been just two things about the year, and so that we can, before I do my little talk, it's been, a lot of you not aware of all the things that have gone on, but it's been a really good year. A lot of things have happened. It's been a bit disorganized, and our goal of this conference, the steering committee, is to help get some things organized and get some more people involved doing important jobs that need to get done. What was great about it, you'll see the journal that's coming out. Is that there? I haven't She's what?
She's in town.
She's in town, right, and I've seen her and talked to her, she's just not here yet. Beth has done a fabulous job of getting that out, getting newsletters out, and things like that. Of course, our conference, this one, all organized, as you've all met, Max outside. Max? Max, come here. Just want to make sure everybody, Max and Natalie. You know, as I will attest to, it's an unbelievable job, and they're not going to get you sleep for the next few days. And I plan to sleep even if they don't. A lot of new members, like there was things that happened like sort of a mini conference around where you right there in Arizona, that kind of thing, and which we hope will happen more, you know, at the, was that the National ACDF festival? Yeah, and then there's this regional American College Dance Festivals that we hope more things will be happening at. We've got an invitation to do that at, so that's, you know, for the future. Anyway, tremendous amount of different kinds of things going on. One of the big things we're going to be needing, and I'm going to just tell you right now so that you can think about your involvement as the week. We set up how elections of officers has happened, 2-year term. So a couple of us are in the middle of a 2-year term, which is myself, president, and the vice president, and then we'll come up for re-election next year, and I hope other people will want to do these jobs. We need a secretary, because secretary this year is going to be probably the conference coordinator for next year. Those are 2 difficult jobs. Secretary next year will help with a couple little newsletters putting out. So if you have interest in writing, maybe a little computer ability and interest, really, we need people to volunteer to help with secretary. So think about it, and Richard Cameron Wolf, excuse me, Richard Cameron Richard, so everybody knows him, is going to collect just, you know, people who would like to say, I'd like to volunteer to do that job, and then we'll hold an election at the end. So a treasurer who collects membership and dues, we need somebody to do that. We need to work on a nonprofit status, because we're handling a bunch of money, and we have to have that. We need somebody who's willing to do a little bit of research about it and get the ball rolling on that, on nonprofit status. So a person for that, and a person to help start collecting a few statistics about the field. Types of jobs that are out there, pay scales, and a few things like that. We as the guild need to have a little information. So that's 4 jobs, and if you are, I know nobody has time, right? I mean, everybody of us are crazy, but people have been putting in time despite the fact that we don't have it. So if you have an interest in serving others in the guild and helping the thing get moving, secretary and treasurer, and his nonprofit status going after that, and research, doing a little bit of research would be really helpful. So think about it and give your name to Richard. Okay? End of announcements. Last year I did one, a little paper on historical styles, and I read it because it seemed to me a very unimprovisational thing to do. And I'm going to do the same, which is really bizarre, to read a paper. But I'm doing it again because that's felt like the thing to do. Sort of an unspontaneous practice in unspontaneity. This is me a month ago talking to you today, you know? It's that kind of a thing. So if I make little comments in there, it's just to talk to you today. This paper is called Creativity, Self 1 and Self 2. My investigation into creativity started some 20 odd years ago when I first started to accompany dance classes. I had no idea at that time where this investigation would lead, or even that it was an investigation. In the years since, the process of creative discovery has proved to be remarkably simple. In our field, it goes something like this. You sit on a piano bench in a dance class, and when they say play, you play. And voila. And by the seat of your pants, you learn to be creative. And that's the only way you learn, by the seat of your pants. That's not to say that this experience hasn't been profound. It's been often absolutely profound and uplifting and beyond understanding, as well as trite, boring, and stupid. I'm sure many of you share these kinds of experiences. My interests recently have broadened to a larger discussion, or examination of creativity. This is in part because it relates to my study with Tim Galway, who wrote the extremely popular book, The Inner Game of Tennis. In case some of you don't know, I supported myself for years by teaching tennis when music wasn't making me enough money. I was thinking about that last night. I took a pretty healthy pay cut to come to this field. I don't know. It also relates to 15 years of practice in meditation, lifelong work as a creative artist, and deep concerns about education in this country. The discussion of creativity is a follow-up of the paper I did for the journal this year called Craft and Inspiration. But since none of you have seen that, who cares? Okay. Creativity. Creativity from the most personal point of view is and will always be a mystery. I believe it's one of the most profound mystical experiences and peak human experience. For in our most creative moments, we have the experience of being united with not only ourselves, but everything around us. Maybe we should stop here. If it is a profoundly mystical experience, why talk in words about it? Words, as I will show, are in some way an antithesis to the mystical experience. I am presenting this paper to re-emphasize its importance, to open discussion of its legitimacy and the importance in academia, and to draw attention to interesting research in the field. I hope to reinvestigate our role in encouraging training in creativity in academia. And we who spend a great deal of our time in improvisation are perfectly suited for this role. Left and right brain activities. See, I have these little headings here. Left and right brain. Let me start with a very current metaphor to discuss creativity. It's the concept of left brain activities and right brain activities. I'm sure most of you are familiar. Left brain activities are those which the left side of the brain controls and which center on language, logic, numbers, and linear thinking. I always think because it's the left brain controls the right side, the right hand, and my right hand is, because I'm right-handed, is controlling, the more controlling of my hands. This is the linear language side. I'm just stating here in case a few of you get these two confused, because I'm going to be talking about the two all day. I want to make sure you understand which is which. Right brain thinking, the left-hand side, it makes jumps. Doesn't go in an orderly fashion. It's visual, it's the center of emotions and physical sensations, and as well defines these things as artistic sensibilities. Those are all in the right side of the brain. Very different functions. In our current society, we stress many of the left brain activities. Linear thinking, verbal skills, memorization of facts and data, logic, numerical ability, and analysis. The importance of these attributes is taught to us through years of schooling. Right-brained activities are not totally ignored. The creative persons are given a great deal of respect, but in the majority of our schooling, it is neglected. And the message of societal values is very clear. This left brain, or linear kind of emphasis, has a profound effect, not only on what we learn, but how we learn and how we feel about it. More important than this predominance of left brain activities in academia focuses us on external learning rather than internal learning. We are taught that learning is outside of us, something to be taken in. Personal inner exploration is given very little credibility. This externalized process tends to do several things. It teaches us to mistrust ourselves and does not develop self-confidence in ourselves to learn. It leads us to stumble onto creativity on our own. It teaches us to learn through words. Woe betide the dyslexic. It teaches trust and delight in quantification and mistrust of anything that can't be verified in these terms. It reinforces analytical thinking, which, and here's for me the most important part, which it encourages a sense of separation between us and what we're studying. A sense of that we're something different from that. Above all, our abiding belief in science and scientific method teaches us a distance from the world around us, a manipulative relationship. We aren't part of a scene, we are acting on a scene, and the scene is acting on us. And I'll parenthetically add that computers, in this regard, are left brain. As of yet, they're not intuitive machines. They're linear machines. So what computers have done is taken already a dominance, a left brain dominance that we have in our society, and magnified it 100-fold. It's like we plugged in the left side of our brain to this extra thing, and now it's huger and huger. That's, of course, one of the reasons why we must focus, and especially creative artists must focus on right brain activities more. Self one and self two. In his work as a tennis teacher, Tim Galway began to similarly label two sides of ourselves. He called them self one and self two. How he came to this label was by hearing conversations on tennis courts. Now, the conversation would be with only one person involved. And it would go something like this. You dummy, you hit the ball into the net. You are so stupid. This is with only one person there. He knew that to have a conversation, there must be two people. The one who's doing the talking, and the one who's supposed to be listening. Self one, as he labeled it, was doing the talking. Self two was getting abused. Self one is the external verbal learner. Self two was the instinctive, intuitive inner learner. The same learner that taught us to walk and talk so perfectly when we were children. I was like, think about this. It's quite an interesting way that we usually learn to walk first before we learn to talk. And I think it's perfect because for sure, if we learn to talk, before we learn to walk, there'd be somebody, there'd be a parent there going, no, now you shift your weight from your toe to your metatarsal, to your heel, before you, it would be like that. And everybody could walk Maybe that's just from our dance, our relationship, I don't think that. This is very close to this left and right brain description of our mind, the self one, self two. One part of it seems more on the surface or on the outside. The other is more internal and maybe more unconscious. The external side is the more verbal side and seems to give orders. This is the side that says, no, you dummy, you just hit the ball into the net. The other side that gets credited for hitting the ball into the net never responds. It's like the tar baby in Brer Rabbit stories who sits there without responding. Do you know Brer Rabbit stories? Oh yeah, my favorite stories. Any of you who don't, we have Brer Rabbit stories tonight. The tar baby, Brer Rabbit goes up and hits. And of course his hand sticks and the tar baby never responds. Why? We wonder why it never does, this inner self, never does what we order it to. This dialogue is sometimes silent, you know, us ordering it to this. Inside the head, it showed clearly to Tim Galway that there were two sides ourselves. Our traditional method of learning reflects Western society's problems. We are out of touch with self, too, and the power it possesses. We don't know as well how to use our right-brained, intuitive, nonlinear functions. This is the heart of my thesis today. We have lost touch with self, too. We have lost touch with the right side of our brain, and as Carl Jung spent his life demonstrating to us, we have lost touch with our unconscious selves and its ties to nature and mankind. Because of this, we are in danger of losing touch with our creative selves. Now, let me say that I'm addressing the people who I think are very much in touch with creative selves. You couldn't do the work we do every day without loving that kind of thing and without being drawn to it. And I think we love it because it exercises that parts of our brain that we love to exercise, all of us. So, the unconscious. Since I've mentioned Jung's name, I think we should mention the unconscious. The unconscious, in Jung's term, refers to things we are unaware of, such as feelings or fears or memories. In Jung's definition, it also contains the collective unconscious, which are memories of our race, human race, and spontaneous connection to all mankind. That's how he defined the collective unconscious. This is a world that psychologists delve into to uncover portions of ourselves that are causing us problems. You notice we never delve into the unconscious when we're happy. In traditional psychotherapy, the world is explored by paying attention to our feelings and our dreams and imaginings, and learning from them why we're so screwed up. For this, we pay $100 an hour. Good work. Now, it is also my thesis that in these areas, self too, again, we're going to say self too is the inner self, the right brain, the unconscious are much the same. I'm going to use these three terms: self too, that inner person who's been being talked to, the right brain, again, the intuitive side, and the unconscious, as much the same. These are three descriptions of the supposed inner world. Each description has its usefulness. They are useful in a quest to create the whole person, and are especially useful for the creative artist. Why is this exploration an ordeal? Why do we have to consult an inner tennis teacher or psychologist to explore these sides of ourselves? Why don't we know this information like we know our image in the mirror? Are we afraid there are corpses down there? Jung said, it is easier to go to the moon and Mars than to learn about what's inside us. I'm not totally convinced of this. It's a case of the message being subtle and the world is very loud. The inner tennis lesson. I'm going to answer one part of this question and talk about it by describing an inner tennis lesson with my study with Tim. I hope this will give you an idea how Tim Galway approaches reaching the unconscious or the right brain. He does it through a very ordinary activity, hitting tennis balls. Tim would start a lesson with me by saying, "So what's going on?" My answer was usually, "Oh, I don't know, nothing, I guess." He would then invite me to demonstrate this nothing by hitting a few tennis balls with him, until it occurred to me that something was actually going on. An example could be my backhand was going out, or my volley wasn't working, or I played poorly in competition. Virtually anything was risk for an inner tennis lesson. It could be something good, too, we could be talking about, although how many times we go to a teacher again to explore something that's positive, that's working. Eventually I would remember that something was going on here out there in the tunnels, and I say my backhand was having trouble with it. Now Tim's quite a brilliant teacher, and his response would be, "Oh, tell me about it." Of course, I'd mumble something incoherently about my analysis of my problem. He'd then take me out on the court, begin to have me demonstrate it to him. Already, this is a brilliant ploy, because as soon as you try to demonstrate how badly something is working, it often ceases to work badly. He would be saying to me, "Show me how that backhand goes out of the court. Really let the ball fly out of the court." Of course, all the balls would go straight into the court. This would reaffirm my feeling that my body was an uncooperative, malignant blob of protoplasm. Of course, it would reaffirm for Tim that freeing up the mind frees up the body. He would point this out, in case I missed it, that the harder I tried, the more likely I was not to have success, even in such a funny activity as trying to fall out. Much of what had to be learned in the beginning was what trying really was about. Of course, this is no news to you, that the answer was trying was more about focused awareness than physical effort. Going back to the lesson, let's assume I finally managed to hit the backhands out of the court. The whole ploy was then a series of questions, such as, okay, how far out was that ball? I couldn't tell him accurately, usually, because I was too busy, as we all are, I was too busy trying to get the ball in. Tim would focus my attention more and more on accurately being able to tell him where the ball landed, as well as how high it traveled over the net and with what spin. Now, not only is it important to know this kind of information, but often in this process, surprisingly, changes would begin to happen in how the ball flew. Without trying, the body was starting to make subtle adjustments, and the results were changing. And in a way, he was trying to teach me to be a bystander and watching this process, to see that there was a process going on besides what I would be doing consciously. Usually at this time, some sensations in my swing would start to draw attention away from the flying ball, and I would mention this. His reply would always be the same. Oh, so you're feeling something in your arm? Ah, tell me about it. Yeah, I said, it sort of feels sort of jerky and klutzy. This is academic talk for everybody here. He would say, jerky and klutzy, tell me about it. He would ask me to be very precise in reporting when, where, and how my arm felt jerky and klutzy. The usual report was something in the nature of, well, it seems to flop a little when it comes forward, then sort of a kink right as it hits the ball. That's about all you can say when you're in this kind of situation. Tim replied, flop and crink, tell me about it. About this time I want to club him with my racket. I wanted to say, tell me what to do, Tim. Tell me what to do to make this thing right. But instead, I contented myself to describe how it flops and it kinks before it hits the ball. In the early lessons, Tim had to convince me not to try and change things yet, but to content myself for a while, just reporting and learning what was actually happening. There is this irresistible desire to do something about the balls that are flying to the back fence. But you end up doing it in a very, forcing kind of way. One of his favorite techniques was to ask me to assign numbers from 1 to 10 to describe what I perceived to be happening. Such as, I would form a jerky and klutzy scale. 10 is totally jerky and klutzy. 1 would be totally coordinated. So he hit balls to me, and a 10, if it felt jerky and klutzy, it was a 10. Felt totally smooth and coordinated, it would be a 1. My job would be just to call accurately and watch the process. Now the beauty of this, of course, is you derive that secret pleasure in this from getting something right. You hit a ball, oh, that was a 10, that was very jerky and klutzy. You would say, very good. In this process, you could watch the body, get to feel the difference between what I label coordinated and uncoordinated, moving towards, and somehow you start to see the body move more and more towards coordination. Inevitably, of course, the calls became to be like 1, 2, and 3. And the corrections, you weren't always sure what the differences were. It was an extraordinary sensation of not knowing what the change had all been about. It wasn't just that, start to take your racket hand higher, the backswing. It was never that gross motor kind of stuff. Much more subtle and simple as the body sort of moved one thing into another into place until they were ones, very uncoordinated. Very coordinated. And that's a real mysterious process that you watched, and you leave a lesson, and I often invited musicians down to watch these lessons so we could all talk about learning about the whole thing. And we Well, what actually happened? I'm not sure anybody could say what all the subtle differences were between us, and this shot would begin to have that kind of boom, that kind of life, and coordination, and focus. And the other ones were very different, but you couldn't see big differences. Over the course of these lessons, I gained a profound appreciation for the subtle ability of the human body. The question always left was, well, who was doing this changing? If I wasn't trying to make changes that were happening, then who was? How come the balls were suddenly going into the court? He had not given instruction, and I was not trying to do anything specific, but to pay attention and notice differences. Sometimes I could feel the changes that were taking place. At other times, I was not so sure the difference was. Again, I was learning to trust feelings and sensations, not verbal instructions. He kept me out of the world of verbal instructions almost entirely. Again, now verbal instructions are fine, but you always have to translate them into sensations and kinesthetic impulses anyway. We watch for hours a day this going on in a dance class. His also feeling was that as a teacher, it wasn't for him to decide how the best backhand was going to be, because everybody in the world of tennis hits backhands quite differently. It was ours to discover together how that kind of thing worked. Another techniques that Tim tried on me, of the many he used that were always towards his nonverbal kind of instruction, was a very simple one, which I'm sure you've heard before. He asked me one day, I'd like you to hit these, he walked up to me and I remember this very clearly, he said, I'd like to see you hit these next set of balls with total abandon. I went, well. He said, well, what's the problem? He says, well, for one, I don't like the idea of all the balls I'm about to hit going over that far fence. And he said, well, okay, we got big basketballs here. Why don't we just go ahead and try this as an experiment for this once? So, I secretly found the thought, after he'd given me permission, of hitting all the balls over the fence quite delightful after years of trying not to hit them over the fence, you know what I mean? Doing something with total abandon is quite an interesting experience. I don't know how many times we all experience that, although again, this group probably experiences more than others. I learned a lesson that afternoon, that how an interesting emotion abandon was. Well, it's not one we're ever taught. I think everybody's secretly afraid of this kind of. They're afraid that the abandon will lead to throwing yourself off a cliff or sex or drugs or something. I'm not sure. To be truthful, a few balls hit the fence, but only a few. What was extraordinary about it for everybody, myself and everybody watching the lesson that day, was that mostly they were low, hard screamers. They're just letting everything go. Just letting everything go and blasting. Or just hitting at whatever level. Doesn't mean that you're hitting hard. Clearly this had unlocked something in me. And it was fun. That was what Tim was after, of course, unlocking things in the students. He always used techniques like this, and there are many of them that didn't involve instruction. What happened without his or my verbal or analytical ability. In the end, what is this self-tool that he was trying to get us at all about? This is a long description of some of this. And of course, the obvious answer is he's trying to get us past this linear rational self, the left brain part of our consciousness. This self, self one, as Tim named it, is helpful in almost every area of human endeavor. It can also be a tremendous hindrance. This is what has happened, particularly in the last 100 years. As we have improved our rational abilities, we have lost a certain, what I'm going to call, a mythic connection with the world. I often think what things would be like before the written word. I would be telling this story to you around the fire, with the starry sky above, making pictures with my hands. It would be an entirely different communication. partly due to the advance of science, partly due to the dependence on the written word, and partially due to a system of education we become dominated. We are taught to learn with words, speak with words, communicate with others with written words. We think rationally, we talk rationally, we write rationally. Year after year, we lose our sense of the mystical in our world as science replaces it. Science trying to become our Apollo and our Zeus. Science is the mythology of the West, and as a myth, I don't think it really works. In this process, we have learned to associate our conscious mind with those left-brain activities. Right-brain thoughts are not trusted. The right brain, however, does think and remember. It just thinks and remembers in different language. So here we have two sides of ourselves who are both thinking, both having their own separate memories, and these memories are stored each inside the brain, separated. They're not whole, linked together by that. And because of our one-sided training, it takes single-minded attention and a strong desire to let our verbal, rational way of looking at things loosen its grip and for us to experience and intuit and grow in a non-verbal way. Tim Galloway was not trying to teach me that the traditional ways of learning tennis were wrong. They are simply one-sided. And there's a practical and poetic loss when we function in a one-sided way. I'm going to talk a minute about academia. Many of us are in academia. It's easy to see that academia is dominated by left brain activities, as were elementary and secondary schools. Actually, probably elementary schools is not so. In elementary schools, you still get to do a lot of experiential things. At this very moment, of course, the irony is that I'm delivering a verbal, logical, rational, analytical paper on creativity. It's like teaching swimming in the desert. Music, improvisation, and composition, I would add teaching, are the very heart right-brain activities. Of course, they require logic, but they would be empty and hollow without the right-brain qualities. They depend upon intuition, creative and inspirational and nonlinear thinking for their existence. I mean, think about teaching for a minute. We think that, I'm very convinced that it depends on intuition and real creativity and nonlinear thinking. Think of your own teaching. Those moments that have been great have always been that kind of surprise, that kind of intuitive, that kind of, it's not just about following lesson plans and going from A to B. In fact, in the end, that becomes so little important. What really is important is those moments of tremendous emotional engagement. Okay? This is our profession. Intuition, these teaching, composition, improvisation. Therefore, it's our job to promote these qualities. Since there is so little energy in this direction in academia to begin with, academia can become more and more lopsided. Academia has this bias that everything has to be justified and made legitimate in left-brain terms. As time passes, these terms get more and more exaggerated as each generation seeks its foothold in academia by outdoing the last. Everyone tries to out-left-brain each other. I've been tenured for quite a while, and as I watch the process, I perceive that what drives the process is people's desire to ensure their own job security, increase their pay, increase their standing and respect in academia. The process of review is done by peers, and in some misguided attempt at fairness, the standards are dominated by what we would call quantifiable ones. I mean, everybody who's been on these committees knows what I'm talking about. And the tone of scholarship becomes dry. I was like to think in terms sometimes of wet and dry. This is because of the fear that personal, subjective, intuitive judgments will merely become political and without standards. That's what people are afraid of. They're afraid that those won't be any standards. As it is, I perceive the way things are working as to be very political and with questionable standards. so refreshed by playing for a dance class in that it is devoid of these considerations. It's almost totally intuitive at its highest level, and the judgment of effectiveness is almost totally subjective. What makes our profession so unique, I'm particularly referring now to improvising in dance class, is that it's a constant schoolroom for creativity. The hours of improvisation form our mental and emotional functioning. If one is an athlete, the mind and body are formed by that activity. If one is a scholar, the mind and the body, alas, are formed around that activity. If one is a mother, an accountant, a teacher, the whole physiology and psychology are reformed to fit that occupation, like a tree being shaped by a windy hillside. So we are incredibly fortunate to be formed in the mold of constantly practiced improvisation and creativity. In the end, we become fine-tuned to spontaneity, to speaking and playing from the heart, and letting our lives be guided by intuitive impulses. Now, personally, I know this to be true. I would have thought that 10 years ago I would have run dry in playing for Pliés. You ever think about that? How many plays have you played for? Why haven't you run dry? And that's the surprising thing. You know, you come to that millionth and one class, and you play Pliés, and all of a sudden there's something happening. Something really incredible. And it's not just, well, they're in the same room, but sometimes it's because of what they're doing. I know what dry spells are, but I have developed enormous faith in the depth and the well of creativity. And I can't believe sometimes that I get paid to do it. I'm sure you've had that experience. You're sitting in class, and you're playing away, and you're having a great time, and you think, I'm getting paid. I mean, it's a good deal. Not well paid, mind you. An important part of our job then is to teach creativity. And if it can be taught, and I think it can, we can at least point the direction and speak of it as the highest state of mind. So how should we do this? Let's look back at Tim Galway's method and see what there is to learn. In the simplest view, his method is the Socratic method. It revolves around an emphasis on self-knowledge and uses questions as its principal method. The answers the student arrives at are dependent on the student and might be different than what the teacher had in mind. There's a great openness that Tim always had to saying, who knows where this could end up? Who knows what you could learn from this? And it might be different than what I believe. Any of you have read that great book, Teaching as a Subversive Activity, that addresses that wonderfully. It's a wonderful book. He emphasizes that the real battle is an inner battle. To learn backhand is useful on the court, but to learn about learning, you're hitting a backhand. To learn about your inner self is to learn a lesson that will go beyond the tennis court. And creative genius. One of the ways to learn about creativity is from those great creative individuals throughout history and what they've said about their work. I'm going to read from a couple letters written by Tchaikovsky, Mozart, Einstein, Carlyle, and Jung. Just to give us something up here to see what they think, what they feel about it. And for me, it's illuminating. First, Tchaikovsky. This is like a letter to his brother or something when he had asked, I think it was his brother, who had asked him about his creative process. And he wrote back. I'm cutting into the middle of the letter. Do not believe those who try to persuade you that composition is only a cold exercise of the intellect. The only music capable of moving and touching us is that which flows from the depths of the composer's soul when he is stirred by inspiration. There is no doubt that even the greatest musical geniuses have sometimes worked without inspiration. This guest does not always respond to the first invitation. I like that way. It's a guest. We must always work. And a self-respecting artist must not fold his hands on the pretext that he is not in the mood. If we wait for the mood without endeavoring to meet it halfway, we easily become indolent and apathetic. We must be patient and believe that inspiration will come to those who can master their disinclination. How's that? His word is, of the translation word, disinclination. A few days ago, I told you that I was working every day without any real inspiration. Had I given way to my disinclination, undoubtedly I should have drifted into a long period of idleness. But my patience and faith did not fail me, and today I felt that inexplicable glow of inspiration, of which I told you, thanks to which I know beforehand that wherever I write today will have power to make an impression and to touch the hearts of those who hear it. I hope you will not think I'm indulging in self-laudation if I tell you that I very seldom suffer from this disinclination to work. I believe the reason for this is that I am naturally patient. I have learned to master myself, and I am glad I have not followed in the steps of some of my Russian colleagues who have no self-confidence and are so impatient that at the least difficulty they are ready to throw a sponge. This is why, in spite of great gifts, they accomplish so little, and that in an amateur way. What has been set down in a moment of ardor must be critically examined, improved, extended, or condensed as the form requires. Sometimes one must do oneself violence, must sternly erase things thought out with love and enthusiasm. I cannot complain of poverty of imagination or lack of inventive power, but on the other hand, I've always suffered from my want of skill in the management of form. This guy knew himself, Only after strenuous labor have I at last succeeded in making the form of my compositions correspond more or less with their contents. When you know Tchaikovsky's work, as we do, of course, isn't that illuminating about him? And the two parts of the process. Two very clear. You keep hearing that over and over in reading great people's works. You keep hearing, about that first process, which is totally intuitive. The second part of the process, which is brutally self-examinatory. Take the scalpel to your own works. Here's Mozart. Now this, of course, is, Mozart, what do you say about Mozart, capable of believing almost anything about him, right? He's describing in the letter his process. When I am, as it were, completely myself, entirely alone and of good cheer, say, traveling in the carriage or walking after a good meal, or during the night when I cannot sleep, it is on such occasions that my ideas flow best and most abundantly. Whence and how they come, I know not, nor can I force them. These pleasures that please me, I retain in my memory, and am accustomed, as I have been told, to hum them to myself. If I continue in this way, it soon occurs to me how I may turn this or that morsel to account, so as to make a good dish of it. That is to say, agreeable to the rules of counterpoint. A good dish of it, agreeable to the rules of counterpoint, to the peculiarities of various instruments, etc. As this fires my soul, provided I am not disturbed, my subject enlarges itself, becomes methodized and defined, and the whole, though it be long, stands almost complete and finished in my mind, so that I can survey it like a fine piece of a picture or a beautiful statue at a glance. What a delight this is, I cannot tell. All this inventing, this producing, takes place in a pleasing, lively reading. Oh boy. Still, the actual hearing of the tout ensemble is, after all, the best. What has been thus produced, I do not easily forget, and this is perhaps the best gift I have my divine Maker to thank for. Yeah, I would say. When I proceed to write down my ideas, I take out of the bag of my memory, if I may use that phrase, what has been previously collected into it in the way I have mentioned. For this reason, the committing to paper is done rather quickly, for everything is, as I've said before, already finished, and rarely differs on paper from that which was in my imagination. At this occupation, I can therefore suffer myself to be disturbed, for whatever may be going on around me, I write and talk, but only if fowls and geese, or Gretel and Barbel, or some such matters. Can you picture this guy? Oh boy. But it is interesting to have, that's a clear picture. He paints of himself, walking around and thinking. What's amazing to me most, I think, is the storage powers of his memory. He just puts it up there, and then sometime later, he sits down, okay, I'll write it down now. Wow. Man. This from Einstein, because I was interested in looking at scientists too, and they're very illuminating, they're a lot the same. The words, Einstein, the words or the language as they're written or spoken do not seem to play a role in my mechanism of thought. Words or language do not play a mechanism. The psychical entities which seem to serve as elements in thought are certain signs and more or less clear images which can be voluntarily reproduced in the mind. This combinatory play seems to be the essential feature in productive thought. Before there is any connection with logical words or other kinds of signs which can be communicated to others. The above elements, in my case, are visual and some of muscular type. Conventional words or signs have to be sought for laboriously and only in the second stage when the mentioned associative play is significantly established and can be reproduced at will. So his two things are visual and muscular. And that's how he did the theory of relativity. Wow. Muscular. And I've heard that one from scientists in several of these. A muscular response. And they talked about it like a kinesthetic response. It's interesting for us. I'm going to skip one here because we move, moving on. I want to go to Carl Jung. I'm going to skip Carlisle. He took a trip to visit the Pueblo Indians. And in his great end of his life biography, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, he says, out of sheer envy, we are obliged to smile at the Pueblo Indians' naivete and plume ourselves on our own cleverness. For otherwise we would discover how impoverished and down at the heels we are. Knowledge does not enrich us. Knowledge does not enrich us. It removes us more and more from the mythic world in which we were once at home by right of birth. This is an 82-year-old man speaking at the end of the life of looking at his own and others' unconscious. And lastly, Jung again in the summation of his life's work. When I look back upon it today and consider what happened to me during the period of my work upon the fantasies, these were images and dreams that he had, his own personal ones, it seems to me as though a message had come to me with overwhelming force. There were things in the images which occurred not only to myself but many others. It was then I ceased to belong to myself alone and ceased to have the right to do so. From then on, my life belonged to the generality. The knowledge I was concerned with or seeking still could not be found in the science of those days. I myself had to undergo the original experience of these dreams and unconscious experiences, and moreover to try and plant the results of my experience in the soil of reality. Otherwise, they would have remained subjective assumptions without that validity. It was then I dedicated myself to the service of the psyche. I loved it and hated it, but it was my greatest wealth. My delivering myself over to it, as it were, was the only way in which I could endure my existence and live as fully as possible. Today, I can say that I've never lost touch with these initial experiences, and as we describe these experiences, they were unbelievable. I thought that Jung was a man who studied, his patients and learned from studying them. No, he studied his own and revelations and mystical experiences of his own as well as his patients, and they were extraordinary. All my works, all my creative activities come from these initial fantasies and dreams which began in 1912, almost 50 years ago. Everything I accomplished in later life was already contained in them, although at first only in the form of emotions and images. You see, with all these people, they're talking about these first, very, in my terms, right brain, very imagistic, very intangible, very not word place that they worked in. And then later they found words. Later they found expression. I'm going to jump to the end here. because I have a list of things. In the article I wrote, you'll see I also, in the journal, I also made a list of things. But this is, what are these right brain functions we want to enhance, and how can we use them in our improvisation? Let's get down to practical nitty-gritty here. Number one, by the way, I have copies of this if some of you, I didn't make enough for everybody, if some of you want to take copies of this at the end, rather than trying to write things down. One, the right brain thinks in emotional terms. It's the basis of the right brain. Thinks in emotions. When you are engaged emotionally, you have engaged that side of your brain. Descriptions of creativity in all fields show that creative moments there's a great deal of emotion present. In such areas as mathematics and science, it is surprising to learn that they were incredibly charged up emotionally, not just, cerebrally, emotionally, when they were creating great works. It seems to be a type of energy that draws the mind to its fullest function. In making music for dance class, let's get down to talking about our field, this emotional engagement is an exhausting proposition. Since most exercises are short, and there are many different ones throughout the class, it requires an almost emotional schizophrenia, when you go from playing both of that. By the end, that's why we're exhausted. Because we have lived 20 different emotions fully throughout an entire class. Isn't that right? Isn't that why we're exhausted? And we're physically, yes, but more emotionally. You just feel like you play a couple hard classes, you feel dead. But that's the goal. Yeah, that is the goal. Yeah. If we're going to do well, that's what it feels like, and you know you've done it if you get this. There's a subtle difference between playing fully and with energy and playing with emotion. Again, this language of emotion is the language of the unconscious. Number two, the right side of the brain controls our physical actions. Focusing on these sensations focuses your mental functions on the right side of the brain. There's a great difference between thinking about body movement and sensing it. Practice staying with feelings, totally, with physical sensations. Many improvisers feel that ideas come through their hands rather than they're from their brain. Do you have that impression? What do they do? Go. Yeah, you heard that? Go, magic hands, keep playing, you're doing fine, I won't interfere. You have that. This is just another way of saying that the right side of your brain is your hands. That is part of the brain. That is it. So, if it's not going through your left side of your brain into all the other side, that makes sense. It's the language it talks. Number three, the right side of your brain does not think sequentially. When you are seeking answers to problems or musical ideas, don't always think logically. A baby does not think in logic. Its left brain is not developed. But it does think. And we communicate to it. If you want to create a state, let your mind hop around from thing to thing. Let it be free associate. Look for a feeling, potential that speaks of creative possibilities under the surface. Always waiting for looking under the surface for the creative possibility and hops around looking for that. That's the left brain, that's the right brain side. Try not to think in words. Words is a different language. Live in the pastures of music. Play is a totally right. Number five, play is a totally right quality. The most creative part of our working time should have the feeling of play. Improvisations, plays, we all know. Children understand play. They think the world is play. They really do. At a certain age, the children think everything's play. And they understand it. Maybe they're right. Any creative work should always have this sense. The best scientists work from that point. The atoms of the world dance in this play. Only academia does not play. We should teach them. So bring play to academia. Humor is right brain. I don't need to say more about that. Cultivate eccentricity.
cultivate eccentricity. To cultivate eccentricity is to set your mind in the proper state for creativity. It welcomes whatever happens without prejudging the outcome. It celebrates the unusual. It embraces playfulness. It dances to its own drummer. This is the true state of our unconscious, and it doesn't necessarily mean wearing a purple hat. Eccentricity is the resistance to dominant ideas, patterns of thought, and ways of behaving. And this promotes original ideas. Diminish self-criticism. It's like Tchaikovsky said, our job is to be patient and wait. Embrace opposing ideas. Number 9. The deepest part of our brain, the unconscious, has no trouble with two opposing ideas. It's the right side of our brain that can't deal with opposition of ideas. So start to embrace opposite ideas to what you know, to what you do, to what you play. Embrace them. Just take them on. Take two opposing ideas. That's how that side of the brain works, and we resist that. Number 10, explore your dreams. Dreams talk the language of the unconscious. Learn to speak that language. Since the unconscious is the source of inspiration, and since that is the language of the right brain, accept dreams as important messengers, and it's the play of the unconscious. And number 11, and finally, last one, learn to understand more deeply the connectedness of all things. The left brain does everything to separate us. Its functioning helps create the appearance of that separation. It's an important functioning, but it has a bad side. It is the moment of creativity that we experience union. Einstein said, it is a trick of man's consciousness that he perceives that the individual is separated